big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
The Bears are making a number of moves. We are in the second official day of free agency as we speak. Been about 96 hours since the legal tampering window has opened. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. Usayd, Koshul, Steve, Letizia here. You guys can follow us on Twitter at CFC Bears, at Halas Beat, and at Usayd Koshul. Steve, this is a little bit of a polarizing free agency period if you are a Bears fan, because everything that I see on social media in terms of instant reactions from beat reporters, from guys like you and I, from fans, is that, yeah, they should have done this, but they did this. Why did they do this instead of what they should have done? I mean, it's been a very sort of back and forth free agency period so far.
Yeah, it's been up and down for sure. I mean, I think, going into the free agency, I didn't really think they were going to be able to make a huge splash, and a lot of that is due to the deals they made last year that kind of really didn't work out, and Diody Ingbo and Grady Jarrett kind of hamstrung them a little bit from the get-go. And then right before free agency, obviously you have Drew Dahlman retiring, which came as a shock, threw a wrench in their plans. So they kind of had to pivot on the fly there. So yeah, they didn't go out and sign the big name free agents, the big money free agents, but I think they got some guys who are going to contribute. And that's just kind of the nature of where they're at as a team right now. You can't just, you're going to have some contracts coming due with Caleb Williams and all these receivers and everything like that, and all these other guys that you can't really be doling out these big money in free agency every single year. Like the joke on Bears Twitter is the Bears were the offseason champs the last 3 years. Like at a certain point, you can't always be the offseason champs. You have to just get the guys that fit your scheme and that guys that are maybe a little undervalued that you value a little bit higher, and just get them in and get them in the door. And then really you got to just get lucky in the draft and hit on those picks and turn those, some of those first and second round picks into the superstars that you want them to sign down the road. So, like I said, it's been up and down. I understand why people are frustrated. I wish they would have done things a little bit differently, which we'll get into. But overall, I mean, I don't think you can complain too much.
Well, it is a little bit interesting because when we look at, last season compared to this season, first of all, the Bears overachieved last season in a sense. They surpassed a lot of people's initial expectations. Some people had them winning 8 or 9 games and not even making it to the playoffs. They made the playoffs. They were basically a Caleb Williams interception and a DJ Moore route away from going to the NFC Championship game and possibly even being 4 quarters from the Super Bowl. Put it that way. We'll put it in that perspective. But, to me, where I look at this entire thing, and the questions now start to surface about, well, what's the level of confidence that you should have at this point in Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson? Well, I still believe that the confidence meter has to be much higher than what so many people think, because it's like the Bears went out, and this free agency period, did they sign any of the big fish? No, they didn't. Could they have reeled in the big fish? Yes, but then you would be putting all your eggs in one basket, which the issue with going out and signing a guy like a Trey Hendrickson is that you would have had to rely heavily on the draft to upgrade at spots like safety, for example. And so it's this big situation to where I'm still looking at the direction of this team, and they upgraded where they felt like they needed to upgrade, which gives me confidence that, Dennis Allen, I don't think gets enough credit for the work that he did last season with Matt Eberflus's personnel. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, like the Bears needed to get faster on defense. They did that with Devin Bush. They wanted to upgrade at the safety position and move on from Kevin Byard and Jaquan Brisker, maybe more so Brisker than Byard, but the reality of it is that they feel like with Kobe Bryant, they're getting a player that upgrades is an upgrade over Brisker and Byard. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, they got the linebacker that they needed because the Bears were so slow on the second level last year. They figured out the safety spot as well. Obviously, there's some questions here, but the nice part about having, a 28, 29-year-old Devin Bush is that he's a scheme fit is what he is. Kobe Bryant's 26, 27 years old. So he's a player that, is going to be here for the next couple of years. So this was really about, to me, trying to find some foundational pieces for Dennis Allen moving forward, which is exactly what they did. So is it the most, encouraging free agency period? No, but they've addressed the holes that they need to address with players that they think are scheme fits, which it's nice to finally have a GM and a head coach that's going to prioritize scheme fit when looking at some of these free agents, instead of it just being, let's go out and let's sign whoever we feel like we can afford.
Yeah, the confidence level for me, going into the season is we have Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, so the offense is going to be just fine. The offense is going to be mostly the same. You lose Drew Dahlman, which is a hit. You trade for Garrett Bradbury. I don't think anyone's going to argue that's not at least a slight downgrade, but I think you're fine there. You lose DJ Moore. You trade DJ Moore, obviously. I don't think that's going to really have a big impact because they have plenty of weapons there. So offensively, they're going to be just fine, and we saw it last year. With the offense, there were flashes of brilliance in between a lot of, frustrating moments. And I think there's just going to be less frustrating moments and more flashes of brilliance that they're going to take that next step offensively. Defensively, obviously, that's where the big overhaul is going to be. You lose Kevin Byard, who had a really good year last year, arguably your best defensive player. You could argue that it was fine to let him go because he's getting older and he's probably going to decline. But that doesn't change the fact that he was probably your best defensive player in 2025. You lose Nahshon Wright, which I think it was the right idea to let him walk, but you're also losing, 7 interceptions and 5 forced fumbles or whatever it is. So regardless of how you think of Nahshon Wright, and even if you think it was okay letting him walk, that's 2 positions where I believe you've downgraded at. I like the Kobe Bryant signing. I think he's a good player. I like the Devin Bush signing. I think he's a good player too. I think, like you said, their scheme fits. That's really nice, but they're also 2 players that played on really good defenses. And when you play on really good defenses, it's easier to look good than it is when you're kind of on your own. Kobe Bryant, that secondary with the Seahawks was incredible, just kind of across the board. I'm not saying, I think he's a really good player and I'm happy to have him, but there is a possibility that he comes to the Bears and he's not surrounded by as much talent and maybe he doesn't look as good. Same thing with Devin Bush. Devin Bush is a player that I watched a lot of his games after they signed him. Really, really nice player, especially against the run. He's really undersized, 5'11", 230 pounds. He's a guy who needs to be kind of kept clean in the run game in order to be effective. And the Bears don't have, Myles Garrett and Jaron Briggs and Alex Wright that the Browns had. The Bears don't have those guys the Browns did. It's going to be tougher to keep him clean with the defensive line that they have. So those are legitimate issues. I like the players in a vacuum. I think they're really good, but I think they still are guys that you need to surround them with more talent in order to maximize their potential. The thing I like about Kobe Bryant as well, that you mentioned the speed, it's also the versatility with Kobe Bryant. He's the guy who can play safe. He can play deep safety. He can play, box safety. He can also man up on slot corners, which is something they did not have last year. Brisker and even Byard, even though Byard's, a good player, man coverage is not their game. So when, the Bears needed to generate pressure because they couldn't get home with 4, they needed to blitz, and that involved your safeties manning up in man coverage, and they just couldn't do that last year. So Kobe Bryant allows you to do that a little bit more. So I think that's really good. But to me, I know we'll get into kind of what we didn't love, what we loved and hated, but I just, they did not address the defensive line in a meaningful way. And that's kind of where, my hope was going into this offseason is that we would address defensive line in free agency and the draft. And now you're kind of in a situation where your first, pick 25 needs to be a pass rusher, and probably 25 and one of your second round picks too need to be a pass rusher, because right now we really didn't change that position group at all.
And by the way, we're recording this on Thursday, March 12th. So as of this point, the Bears have about $6.8 million in cap space per over the cap. You know, the nice part about what you had mentioned is that as we sit here and try to figure out, like, okay, well, what is this team going to go ahead and do? There are still some pretty interesting veteran players out there that the Bears could decide to bring in later on, and that could be after the draft too. You know, Hassan Reddick and Joey Bosa are out there. Cam Jordan is out there as well. Granted, he's 37 years old. Samson Ebukam is a member of he was last with the Colts, so he's a guy that, you know, again, is still out there that the Bears could decide to take a chance on. But I guess, you know, to me, where I look at this thing is that the reason people's confidence seems to be so up and down is because, first of all, the approval ratings for the head coach and GM were at an all-time high last year when the Bears had the season that they had. And the Bears basically looked at last year's draft class and said it's a very good draft for offense. We're going to pad the offensive side of the ball with talent. And then you get to the defensive side of the ball, and it's kind of like they want to do the exact same thing this year. And I fully believe that having 4 picks inside the top 100 allows you to go ahead and do that. Now, where I don't necessarily think that the Bears sort of operated with the most sense of efficiency would be free agency, in terms of, like, you signed Jedrick Wills yesterday to a 1-year deal. And this is Wednesday, by the way, when they signed Wills to a 1-year deal. Like, with him and his injury history, he's a guy that wasn't even in the league. You probably could have gotten him for like a 1-year vet minimum type deal had you waited a couple more days. You know, I don't think he's going to come here and be a reclamation project. It's one of the things that I understand why the Bears did it, but I kind of hate the move in a sense, because it's like you could have gone ahead and you could have gotten someone for much cheaper than, or even at the vet minimum, even a guy that, you know, wasn't as injured as Jedrick Wills was last year. Granted, he is a former first round pick. And then, you know, I also look at this thing and I'm like, well, if you're going to spend money on bringing Braxton Jones back, with it being like a 1-year, you know, $5 million deal, I believe is what it was, why would you not have also decided to say, like, let us as a team go into the market and see, can we find someone like a Taylor Decker, for example, who would have been a very welcome addition. Now, Taylor Decker would have been more expensive than Wills and Braxton Jones combined, but that, I think, would have given me a lot more confidence in terms of the offensive line going into 2026.
See, I kind of like the Jedrick Wills signing and the Braxton Jones one. I think what those two signs tells me, at least, is that they are very confident that Ozzie Chapillo is going to come back and be that franchise left tackle. Because if you sign, well, man, you just mentioned his name, the Lions left tackle, Decker. If you sign Decker, he's not coming for a 1-year deal. He's coming for a 2-year deal minimum. So he's, you know, maybe even a 3-year deal. So you sign him, and he's kind of your left tackle for the future, and then Ozzie Chapillo is kind of your swing tackle. So the fact that they went kind of cheaper at the left tackle position tells me that they expect Ozzie Chapillo to make a full recovery. Even if he does miss most of the year, they expect him to be kind of hit their left tackle in 2027. But the reason I like the Jedrick Wills and Braxton Jones signings is because I think that gives you really good competition at that spot. If they would have just brought back, I was fine with the Braxton Jones deal when they made it. I was like, okay, that makes sense. You know, it's tough to find a left tackle in free agency. You don't want to use a draft pick on it when you have Ozzie Chapillo from last year. So I understood that, but I was like, man, that's kind of a risk with Braxton Jones. Like, you know, he had some injury issues last year. He was ineffective even when he played. But then you bring in Jedrick Wills, and it's like, okay, one of those guys is going to figure it out. I'm guessing neither has a bunch of guarantees on their deals, so you could probably, you know, just cut the guy, whoever, you know, kind of loses that competition, or you could use one as a swing tackle, whatever it may be. And I think Jedrick Wills, you know, he was injured. He has had some injuries, but he sat out the entire year, and he didn't need to do that. He could have signed with someone last year, rehabbed, and then maybe come back at the end of the year, but he decided just to sit out the entire year, get healthy, get right. I think that was the right thing to do for him. And you know, he was a former top 10 pick. he was playing pretty well early in his career at left tackle for the Browns. He had some injury issues. He wasn't really like an incredible left tackle, but he was an average left tackle when he was healthy. And if the Bears can just get an average left tackle, that is a huge win for them. And we saw last year with Theo Benedict and even Ozzie Tripillo to an extent, the Bears offense can function with lesser talent at that left tackle position. So if the Bears can have Theo Benedict come in and the offense looks okay and you have to kind of hide him and scheme around him, imagine what they could do with a guy who is an average left tackle. It's going to open up the offense a lot. So I actually liked both those signings. I think that allows them to go defense in the draft, because before you bring those guys back, then it was thinking, okay, you got to draft a left tackle, you got to do all this. It kind of just allows them to just focus on defensive line with their first couple picks there.
Well, yeah, I mean, in retrospect, given the money limitations that this franchise has right now in terms of the cap space, I get why they did it. I'm just saying, like, if you really wanted to get people confident in where the offensive line is, especially after Ozzie Tripillo being out for the year and then losing Drew Dahlman, Taylor Decker would have made a little bit more sense. But, one of the things I will say is this. What I do love about this free agency class, and I don't necessarily think that this is a surprise because I had anticipated the Bears were going to go ahead and do this, where it's like, I like how they've gone ahead and they've tried to really emphasize players on the defensive side of the ball that are scheme fits. Now, to your point earlier about, well, you're losing production with guys like Nahshon Wright and Kevin Byard leaving. Like, yeah, that sucks, but there's two things I want to say. I fully believe that, the Bears can find someone to go ahead and take Nahshon Wright's spot. Him leaving, to me, vaults cornerback to one of my bigger needs for this team, second to pass rusher. The other big thing I believe here is that when we look at like Nahshon Wright in his market, I mean, he only signed for a 1 year, $5.5 million deal. So it's one of those where, the market was obviously much cheaper than a lot of people thought it was going to be after the season he had. So in a sense, it would have been nice to see the Bears dip into bringing him in. But then it's like, if you spend the $5 million on Nahshon Wright, well, then the idea of opportunity cost comes up, because at that point it's, hey, we could sign Nahshon Wright, and if we do, then we're not going to have enough wiggle room to possibly sign a veteran that, ends up making it on the market whenever, the draft is all said and done. Because I do believe that that's one of the reasons that the Bears right now are kind of sitting on that $6.8 million that they have, is that they want to see if something else opens up and a guy like a Marshawn Lattimore, who's already on the market, doesn't get signed, and then the Bears bring him in for much cheaper than expected.
Yeah, and I was fine with letting Nahshon Wright go, even though he got a cheaper deal than a lot of people expected. Like, I think that's the absolutely right move, because there was no way he was going to duplicate the year he had last year. But that doesn't change the fact that he had that year. He had those 12 turnovers that he forced. The Bears have to find a way to get someone in who's going to, maybe not he's going to not going to force 12 turnovers, but a guy who's going to take the ball away at least a little bit, and so they are losing that. I think you can, work with Tyreek Stevenson and Za Frazier, who they drafted last year. They could certainly bring in another corner as well. Like you said, Marshawn Lattimore, they could use a pick on a corner for sure. But they are just losing those guys. And I think part of the reason the defense at times looked so good is because they had all those takeaways. And it's foolish to expect those takeaways to be there again this next year. I think Bears were obviously a little bit lucky on that side of the ball last year with all their takeaways. So they have to kind of moneyball this situation and get a defense that works. So I do like the Kobe Bryant deal. I like the Devin Bush deal. Even some of their defensive line, contracts, the Neville Gallimore and the Kentavious Street, they weren't too expensive. I think they're good rotational players there, but you really just need, someone who's going to affect the passer in a meaningful way, who can do that, in obvious passing situations without blitzing. We saw it against the Rams last year in the playoffs when the game was on the line and the Rams could just line up 5 wide and and pass the ball. The Bears had no answer, pass rush wise. Matt Stafford was just standing in the pocket, and so far they haven't addressed that. And it just kind of limits them in the draft because now everyone knows that the Bears are picking a pass rusher at 25. If a team behind them wants a pass rusher, they're going to trade up and get to 24 or 23 and get that pass rusher because they know the Bears are going to take them. So I just don't like that strategy of not having that all of your needs filled going into the draft.
And to your point, the hard part about, how the Bears sort of handled this thing is that no one's going to sit there and believe that 37-year-old Cam Jordan is a long-term solution for this team, no matter how much he continues to defy Father Time. Some breaking news here, but Kyler Murray has signed a 1-year deal with the Minnesota Vikings, so it's very possible that, the Bears are going to be facing Kyler Murray twice a year, or that the Vikings are going to have the summer's most fascinating quarterback competition with Kyler Murray versus JJ McCarthy, which a little bit of a passive aggressive comment here, but I'm glad that I don't have to deal with the Bears and a quarterback competition this summer for hopefully the next couple of years. But what's interesting, man, is Ryan Poles spoke to the media today about an hour ago, and if you listen to him speak, first of all, the biggest thing that I noticed is that he wasn't wearing any Bears gear. It was just a completely black hoodie that he had on. But what got me thinking is the fact that he openly admitted that the Bears checked in on Max Crosby and had some conversations. So we probably know that as soon as, something happens, if Crosby becomes available again, then the Bears are probably going to check in on him. But what really got me thinking is this, dude, is it's like everything that he said at the combine 3 weeks ago, he kind of reiterated in terms of like, we're trying to add speed to our defense. And we believe we've done that with guys like Devin Bush and Kobe Bryant. And, he had talked about how when the Bears really got into the thick of the schedule with that stretch that included, Green Bay twice, Minnesota playing the Browns as well, having to play the Vikings as well as the Lions, where it was like they really felt like the team didn't have enough speed and that the Bears went out and upgraded and got the speed. But I guess, the greater question here is that it's like you didn't address pass rusher. You could still address it. Now you're going to have to restructure some money to fit things off the books. But I guess my question to you is this, dude, is Ryan Poles, is his patient approach paying off? Like, he is a guy that has a little bit of I shouldn't say a little bit, but a tendency to be a more conservative and sort of laid back GM compared to his predecessor in Ryan Pace. But is Ryan Poles helping or hurting the Bears right now?
Well, Ryan, I mentioned at the beginning, what's hurting the Bears right now in free agency is the contracts we gave out last year. So yeah, he's been patient, which I think is what he needs to do. But the Dio Odeyingbo and Grady Jarrett contracts absolutely crushed the Bears' chances of really fielding a competent defensive line going into 2026. So I do think that he's doing what he needs to do at this point. Hindsight's 2020. He's got to just focus on 2026. And I like the approach he's taken to free agency, and I like the signings that he's made. But I struggle to say that his approach is paying off because it's kind of the approach that put us in this situation. But whenever you're building a team, you have to just hit on your draft picks. Free agency is just a way to kind of round out your roster, and that's why I like what he's done in free agency this year, because you're not building your team through free agency. You're signing a few guys who fit your needs and fit in certain spots, but you're going to rely on the draft to get your premium players, and that's what they need to do. And they need to get a little bit lucky. Part of the draft is scouting and developing and everything like that, but also part of it's a little bit of luck. The guy's got to fall to you. You got to get a guy. Maybe you get a guy with your pick 60 or pick 89 who outperforms expectations and turns into a superstar. That stuff happens all the time. But you have to start hitting on your second and third round picks. Ryan Poles has been pretty good in the first round for the most part, but his day two picks have been more misses than hits, we'll say. So you need to start hitting on those guys, and you kind of need to hope that you get your defensive version of Luther Burden from last year with one of those, with pick 57, most likely, a guy who maybe, is well regarded, but for some reason falls to the second round, and you scoop him up and he comes in and makes an impact right away. That's the only way I see this defense, really making waves in 2026. They'll be fine. The offense is going to score points. Dennis Allen's a good defensive coordinator. He's got guys who better fit his needs so he can do what he wants. The defense isn't going to be a disaster, at all. But they need guys who can be true difference makers if they want to really go and get to the next level. That's kind of where we are, what I'm kind of talking about here. I think just the expectations have changed. Last year, at this time, you're talking about, like, let's get these guys and maybe we win 7, 8, 9, 10 games. But now the expectation should be winning a Super Bowl. And I think the Bears are pretty far off, still from that. Maybe not pretty far off, but needs a little bit more work on the defensive line if they want to be true Super Bowl contenders.
Well, really, the positive is this, as you had mentioned it, is that with 4 top 100 picks, you should be in a perfect position to go ahead and address some of these needs that you have on defense. And I will say this, I've maintained this stance since they got the extra second round pick from Buffalo last week in the DJ Moore trade, where it's like Ryan Poles today also talked about keeping the present in focus, but also the future in context is what he basically had said. And, from Ryan's perspective, first of all, he's always been this semi-conservative general manager. He's been a little bit aggressive at times with some of the trades that he's made, like a second for Chase Claypool and a second for Montez Sweat. Some of it has paid off. Some of it obviously has not necessarily been what so many people thought it was going to be. I mean, hell, the Bears couldn't trade for an edge rusher at the trade deadline, and then all of a sudden you landed with Joe Tyron Shoyinka for a 7th round pick. But the point I'm making here is this: is that it's nice to see that he does want to stay in the present but keep the future in perspective, in the sense of, like, he knows that some of the rookies that we draft this year on defense are going to be guys that are hopefully building blocks for this team from 2026 through the end of the 2029 season. So, these 4 top 100 picks are essentially another 4-year plan that the Bears are going to have going for them, in the context of, can you find that long-term pass rusher? And then when you have to pay Caleb Williams, can you make sure that pass rusher develops enough to a point where it's on a player that's on a rookie deal? So then you have, a situation where it's like you've got a Will Anderson on your team, right? A guy that's a Will Anderson type player on your team, where it's a guy that's super productive, a guy that, is still on his rookie contract, and your team is winning and is able to, get into the playoffs year after year. Or, do you want to be a team that is like the Buffalo Bills, for example, where it's like, insanely explosive offense and, talent on the offensive side of the ball, but they can never get over the hump because they just don't have that difference maker at the pass rusher position? Like, I think right now the Bears are trying to take more of that, like, let's use the draft to pad our roster with premium talent at key positions so that we can be in a situation to where we've got cheap, cost-controlled contracts for the next 4 years, which, again, is a pretty smart decision given the talent that's coming in this draft class at defensive tackle and edge rusher.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they need to hit on 2 draft picks on the defensive line, an edge rusher and a defensive tackle, or 2 defensive tackles or 2 edge rushers. I don't know, what they're going to end up doing, but they need to hit on 2 of these picks, and they need to not only hit on those picks, but those guys need to be able to contribute right away, which is probably the harder part of the equation there, because you can get a guy pick 60, pick 89, who you develop into a good player, but it's very tough to get those guys at those picks who come in day one and are a legit pass rusher. At 25, you could probably do it. It's more likely, at least. When the Bears were picking in the top 10, like, that's when you have to have a guy who comes in and kind of contributes right away. So there, in my mind, you gotta get a pass rusher at 25 who contributes right away, and then you gotta get lucky with one of your second round picks and find a guy who can contribute right away. And if that's a pass rusher, that's great. Or if it's a safety, they still need a safety. You mentioned cornerbacks in need. Maybe it's one of those positions. But but they need to get two guys, just like they did last year, who contribute right away. That's going to be the hard part. But we'll see. I mean, I do think there are guys available who fit the Bears' needs. That is the other thing, kind of with the defensive line. When I see these mock drafts and all these guys people talking about, there's a lot of pass rushers in this draft class who I don't think the Bears will even have on their radar or even on their draft board. Like an R. Mason Thomas, who's a guy I really love from Oklahoma, but he's undersized. Like Dennis Allen's most likely not gonna draft that guy unless they have a full 180 in philosophy and someone overrides Dennis Allen. But there's a couple other guys kind of like that too, those undersized pass rushers who are great pass rushers, but I just don't see the Bears drafting those guys. Same thing with the defensive tackle. Usually Dennis Allen goes for more of those smaller, quicker defensive tackles. He doesn't go for the guys that are 320 pounds. Like I love Lee Hunter, but he's doesn't really fit the prototype that Dennis Allen wants to go for. Caden McDonald's a good guy, in the first round. Definitely doesn't fit with what Dennis Allen wants to go for. So it's about, there is a lot of talent on the defensive line in this draft, but there's fewer guys who really fit what Dennis Allen likes to do with his defense, and that makes that equation a little bit harder. But I still think that they can still get two guys to kind of help out their rotation.
And listen, people, we'll do a mock draft on this show the last week of March to kind of give you guys our updated thoughts once free agency has fully passed. But I got to ask you this, dude, because you rattled off a possibility of a list of guys that, could or may not make sense for the Bears. They could be ads, guys that the Bears consider. I mean, who are 2 to 3 free agents right now off the top of your head that you feel like the Bears should still go ahead and sign or could sign based on how this market has kind of played out? Now that we have a general idea of, well, this is a position that's commanding X amount of dollars.
Yeah, there's still a couple guys out there. I mean, the big wave of free agency is done, so you're not going to get anyone who's going to come in and be, a game changer. But there are still guys out there who can fit a role and help you out. Obviously, you mentioned they have like $6 million in cap space. They haven't restructured any contracts yet. So if they want to bring any of these guys in, even on these small deals, they're going to have to restructure a contract or two because, you have your draft class that you got to pay. You spend a couple million on these guys, and then you want to have about $5 million or even more kind of in season for any mid-season acquisition. So they're going to have to, do that, restructure some contracts. But I do think there are some guys available. I'm sticking on the defensive line. Obviously, I've been talking about, defensive line all podcast. AJ Epineza from the Bills is a pass rusher who's available. Defensive lineman who's available. He's not the most explosive guy. He's not an elite pass rusher, but he fits exactly what I think Dennis Allen wants his defensive ends: big, long, strong, can set an edge, plays the run well, gives you a little bit, he is a high motor pass rusher. So even if he's not going to win quickly, he can get those, effort sacks. So I think that's someone that they could look into. If they do want to go off, a little out of Dennis Allen's comfort zone and get someone who has a little bit more juice as a pass rusher, Arnold Ebiketie from the Falcons. He's more of like a 3-4 outside linebacker. He played, with the Falcons, but if the Bears signed him, he would be basically just a situational pass rusher. But he's a guy you can bring in maybe on third downs and obvious passing situations who can maybe, affect the quarterback a little bit there. So again, it doesn't really fit exactly what the Bears want. You typically go for, but I think it would make sense to bring him in just to give you something off the edge. And then this one's not a signing, but his name has been floated out in trade rumors, and if he's available, I think the Bears should be all over it. It's Josh Sweat from the Cardinals. Apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently he requested a trade. But he's a guy who's really good. I mean, it makes sense. He's, the Cardinals aren't really going anywhere. He signed a big contract last year. He probably wants to win. If he's available, I think the Bears should do whatever it takes to get him. Brian Poles confirmed that they were in on Max Crosby, in this press conference today. So they're clearly still looking for a pass rusher. So he's a guy who maybe could make some sense. Obviously, it would be a trade cost, and you definitely have to restructure some contracts to get him. But at least he's a guy who can, get after the passer and be a real difference maker for the Bears.
And see, the Sweat stuff is really interesting because the Bears would have a better pass rush with Sweat in the fold, but I wonder, like, what is the compensation going to look like? Because they already gave up a 2027 fifth round pick. So if you do go ahead and you do decide to trade for a player like that, that's fine. But then you need to go ahead and you need to possibly trade down from one of your first 3 picks in this draft in order to go ahead and fill whatever void exists from giving up draft capital for Josh Sweat, which again, the GM there, Monty Ford, I think has been really open to wheeling and dealing as of late, and a lot of that just comes, especially in the draft, and a lot of that just comes from the philosophy of trying to go ahead and stack draft picks. I'm gonna add one more player to your list, dude, just because I feel like at this point in time with free agency, you can never have too many swings with things, right? Like, you can say, all right, well, this is who we're gonna go after, but there's a couple guys that I look at, like a Darian Kinnard, who's a right tackle for Green Bay, or was formerly with Green Bay. Even someone such as a Jacob Phillips, right, who was most recently with the Colts, or even a Sam Kamara, who was with the Bears on the practice squad as well. Sam Kamara is 6'2", 275. He's a player that, so those 3 names are guys that, that the Bears could get for the vet minimum, honestly, and that you bring them in at this point just to sort of gauge and see, all right, well, we got 63 on the roster right now. We're going to be up to 64, 65 by the time, the Elijah Hicks signing goes through. You factor in 7 draft picks and you're at about 71 to 72 players there. So let's go ahead and let's, round it out with some of these other veterans to get to that 90-man roster point. Because the reality of it is also this, that there's no way that the Bears decide, like, hey, we're going to sign 25 undrafted free agents and let them compete for a spot. Now, they could do that, but I don't think that that's going to happen. With other breaking news here is that CJ Gardner-Johnson's going to the Bills on a 1-year, $6 million deal. So there is that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the point of free agency where you really win, to be honest, because all these guys are giving out huge contracts to players. Like, that comes with a lot of expectations, and there's a lot of risk there. Where you really win with free agency is signing those guys, on day 3 or 4 of free agency, and you sign them for a 1-year, $3-4 million deal, and they end up just exceeding expectations. And then, kind of like Akeem Hicks, years ago when the Bears signed him, he was on a pretty small deal. I believe it was a 2-year deal, but not anything groundbreaking in terms of money. And then he turned into a monster. The Bears were able to extend him, and he was a long-time Bear. So if you can find someone like that, it's someone who's ascending, maybe was in a wrong scheme on another team, maybe for whatever reason didn't really break out before he hit free agency. If you can bring some of those young guys in, bring in more speed, like Poles has been saying, and then just kind of, there's a lot of luck involved there, but you got to get a little lucky, bring one of those guys in. Andrew Billings was kind of along the same line. A little bit more recent example. He was brought in on a 1-year deal and really outplayed that contract and got a second contract. So I'm hoping that they can bring in someone like that. I don't know, those guys are obviously very hard to find, but it does happen every single year. So hopefully they, and maybe that's a Neville Gallimore or Catavia Street. I don't know, the guys who you bring them in and then they kind of exceed expectations. So maybe they've already brought that guy in. But if you can, like you said, there you gave a couple good examples, guys you just bring in who have experience, are going to fill out the depth chart, and maybe can give you a little bit more.
2 more quick thoughts here. Number 1, AJ Epinesa is a semi-local guy. He's went to high school at Edwardsville High School, Southern Illinois. So, that is something to consider. The Bears certainly love their Illinois players. I'm also going to add this in that Hassan Reddick is a free agent. So that is a name to go ahead and watch. And then I also believe that, if the Bears really want to get fancy here, Kenneth Murray's this interesting off-ball linebacker that, if you're not going to go ahead and take a linebacker like a CJ Allen or an Anthony Hill Jr., Kenneth Murray would be a pretty intriguing name to consider as well, especially because at this point in time, like, it'd just be a 1-year prove-it deal for a guy that's super fast and is 28 years old. We're going to get out of here. Before we do, make sure you like, comment, subscribe on the video. If you have suggestions for who you think the Bears should be drafting, drop them in the comments below. Give us a 5-star rating and review on any podcasting platform. Check out the Bear Report website. We've got everything from free agency content to scouting reports and mock off seasons. If you're looking at some of my scouting reports, there's going to be a section in there. Does blank prospect fit what the Bears are trying to do on offense or defense? And then check us out on Twitter at Halas Beat, at CFC Bears, and at Usayd Koshul. Have a great weekend, people. Enjoy the snowstorm coming wherever you are in the Midwest. It was 70 degrees on Monday here in Illinois, and you guys will hear from us next week. Bear down, ladies and gentlemen, and try not to get too fired up over the GM.